Chapter 1. The Position. The fog rolled in from the moors each evening like clockwork, thick and yellowed from the factory smoke that still clung to the valley despite half the mills standing empty. Sarah pressed her face to the bus window, watching the skeletal remains of industry drift past in the amber streetlight. Another mill closure had been announced just last week, Henderson's Textiles, where her father had worked for 32 years before the redundancy notice came. The bus wheezed to a stop at the end of Moreland Lane, and Sarah stepped into the damp October air. The manor loomed ahead through the mist, its Victorian silhouette hunched against the darkening sky like some great wounded animal. Blackmore House, the advert had called it. Night security operative required, no experience necessary, immediate start. No questions asked either, which had been a blessing. 3 months of dole queues and rejection letters had worn her patience thin. Whatever this job entailed, it paid better than the factory work that was disappearing faster than morning frost. The heavy oak door groaned open before she could knock. A thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a yellowed mustache peered out at her. "Miss Hartwell, I presume? I'm Mr. Grimsby, site supervisor." His handshake was brief and cold. "Do come in. You'll want to get oriented before the day shift departs." The entrance hall stretched upward into shadow, its walls lined with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to track her movement. The carpet beneath her feet was worn thin, the pattern nearly invisible, except where the electric lights caught its remaining threads. The manor was converted in '75, Grimsby explained, as he led her down a narrow corridor. Council needed a central monitoring station for the industrial sites, active and abandoned both. Cheaper to retrofit this old place than build new. He paused at a heavy door marked Operations. "Your predecessor left rather suddenly, I'm afraid. Personal reasons." The operations room hummed with banks of television monitors displaying empty factory floors, vacant car parks, and derelict buildings. Green phosphor screens cast an eerie glow across the cramped space. A thermos flask sat beside a logbook on the central desk, still warm. "Your shift runs from 8 in the evening until 6 in the morning," Grimsby continued, settling into the chair behind the desk. "Monitor the feeds, log any unusual activity, and patrol the premises once every 2 hours. Simple enough." He opened a desk drawer and withdrew a thin manual, its cover worn smooth by countless hands. The title read Operational Procedures, Blackmore House in faded typewriter text. "Study this carefully. The procedures may seem unconventional, but they're based on years of experience. Follow them precisely." His pale eyes fixed on hers. "Precisely, Miss Hartwell. The previous operators who took liberties with the protocols found the work unsuitable." Sarah accepted the manual, noting how its pages felt soft and pliable, like cloth rather than paper. "What sort of liberties?" "The sort that lead to sudden resignations." Grimsby stood and gathered his coat. "I'll be in tomorrow evening to check on your progress. The telephone extension for emergencies is written inside the cover, though I trust you won't need it." He paused at the door. "One more thing. The east wing is under renovation. Structural issues. Stay out of it entirely, especially after dark. The insurance won't cover accidents in unsecured areas." The door closed with a decisive click, leaving Sarah alone with the humming monitors and the manual in her hands. Chapter 2. The Manual. She opened the manual to find a list that made her frown. Operational Procedures, Blackmore House. Essential Guidelines for Night Operations. 1. Monitor all feeds continuously. Log any movement, however brief, in the official record. 2. Never respond to a knock without first asking who claims this space. Aloud. Wait for a response before proceeding. 3. The east wing is strictly forbidden after sunset. The room with the broken floorboard is particularly dangerous. 4. If you hear sounds resembling chickens or other farm animals, do not investigate. Remain silent and motionless for the duration of a heartbeat. Do not count. 5. When voices speak in foreign languages, especially Afrikaans, remain silent and do not look toward the source. This is crucial. 6. A shadow in the main hallway is not to be confronted. Acknowledge its presence by bowing your head, then continue your duties. 7. Certain phrases must never be uttered aloud. If you hear them spoken, do not repeat them, even to yourself. 8. Say complete patrols must be undertaken every 2 hours. Deviation from the prescribed route may result in disorientation. Sarah set the manual down and rubbed her temples. It read more like the ramblings of someone's mad grandmother than proper work instructions. Farm animals, shadows, foreign languages, what kind of security work was this? The logical part of her mind, the part that had kept her sane through months of unemployment, suggested this was simply the product of too many night shifts and too much isolation. Old buildings made noises, imagination filled in the gaps. The previous operators had probably spooked themselves silly and quit. She turned to the first page of the logbook, curious about what her predecessor had written. October 15th, 2030. All feeds normal. Eastern perimeter quiet. October 16th, 22:15. Sound from upper floor. Investigated. Nothing found. October 16th, 23:45. Knocking at main door. Asked required question. No response. Did not open. October 17th, 1:20. Voice in East Corridor. Foreign language. Followed procedure. 5. Vernal. October 17th, 3:10. Shadow observed. Acknowledged appropriately. And October 17th, 4:55. Cannot continue. Leaving immediately. The final entry was written in a shaking hand. The ink smeared as if the writer's palm had been sweating. Sarah closed the logbook and looked around the operations room. The monitors flickered occasionally, showing empty spaces filled with the blue-white glow of security lighting. Everything appeared normal, almost boring. She made herself a cup of tea from the supplies left in a small kitchenette and settled in to study the feed rotation. 27 cameras covered the exterior and interior of various industrial sites across the valley. Most showed nothing more interesting than empty car parks and abandoned loading bays. As the evening wore on, she began to understand why her predecessor had logged so little activity. The town was dying, its workforce scattered to Manchester and Birmingham. What was left to guard except empty buildings and rusted machinery? At 10:30, she heard the first knock. 3 sharp raps against the front door, echoing through the entrance hall. Sarah froze, her hand halfway to the logbook. The manual's instructions seemed ridiculous in the moment, but the previous operator's notes suggested otherwise. The knocking came again, more insistent. Sarah walked to the operations room door and opened it slightly. The entrance hall stretched away into shadow, the front door barely visible at the far end. "Who claims this space?" she called out, feeling foolish. Silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a minute. No answer came. Following the manual's guidance, she returned to her desk without opening the door. The incident went into the logbook. 22:30. Knocking at main entrance. Asked required question. No response received. She tried to focus on the monitors, but the sound of those 3 knocks lingered in her mind. They had been too sharp, too deliberate. And why would anyone come calling at 10:30 on a Wednesday night at an isolated security station? By midnight, she had almost convinced herself it was probably just a delivery driver or someone lost in the fog. Then she heard the chicken. Chapter 3. The Sounds. The clucking started soft and seemed to come from somewhere above the operations room. At first, Sarah thought it might be a pigeon trapped in the rafters. Old buildings were full of such things. But as she listened, the sound became unmistakably that of a chicken, complete with the scratching of feet against wooden floors. She reached for the logbook, then stopped. The manual said not to investigate, to remain silent for the duration of a heartbeat. But how long was a heartbeat when you couldn't count? The clucking grew louder, joined by what sounded like several birds moving around overhead. Sarah sat perfectly still, her own heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to measure its rhythm. Surely that was long enough. The moment she shifted in her chair, the sound stopped. Complete silence fell over the manor, so absolute that she could hear the electric hum of the monitors seemed unnaturally loud. Even the distant sounds of the town, the occasional lorry on the main road, a dog barking somewhere in the valley, had vanished. Sarah waited another few minutes before making her entry. N015, animal sounds from upper level. Followed procedure 4, REP. The rest of her patrol hour passed without incident, though she found herself glancing frequently at the ceiling. When 2 o'clock arrived, she reluctantly left the operations room for her first patrol. The corridor outside stretched in both directions, lit by dim electric bulbs that cast more shadows than they dispelled. To her left lay the route prescribed in the manual, a circuit through the ground floor that avoided the east wing entirely. To her right, a staircase curved upward into darkness. The prescribed route took her through what had once been the manor's formal rooms. The drawing room now housed filing cabinets and redundant office equipment. The dining room served as a storage area for maintenance supplies. Everything was dusty and neglected, but thoroughly ordinary. She was returning toward the operations room when she saw the shadow. It stood at the far end of the corridor, human-shaped but somehow wrong in its proportions. Too tall, perhaps, or too thin. The electric light seemed to bend around it rather than illuminate it, creating a patch of deeper darkness against the already dim walls. Sarah's first instinct was to call out, to demand identification. Then she remembered Procedure 6, and acknowledge its presence by bowing your head. She stopped walking and inclined her head briefly, keeping her eyes on the floor. When she looked up, the shadow was gone. Back in the operations room, she added the entry to the logbook, 235, shadow observed in main corridor. Acknowledged appropriately. The rest of the night passed quietly, though Sarah found it difficult to concentrate on the monitors. Every small sound, the building settling, the wind in the eaves, the distant rumble of a late lorry, made her tense. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, she was exhausted. Grimsby appeared promptly as the morning light began to penetrate the fog. He examined the logbook with what seemed like approval. "Very good, Miss Hartwell. You followed the procedures exactly." He glanced at her tired face. "The first few nights are always the most difficult. You'll adjust." "Mr. Grimsby, about those procedures." "Yes? They seem rather unusual for a security position." His pale eyes regarded her with something that might have been sympathy. "This is an unusual place, Miss Hartwell. The procedures exist for very good reasons. Trust in that, and you'll find the work tolerable." He paused at the door. "Your predecessor lasted 3 weeks. The one before her made it nearly 2 months. I have high hopes for you." Sarah walked home through the lifting fog, trying to make sense of what she had experienced. In the daylight, it was easy to rationalize. Old buildings made strange sounds. Isolation played tricks on the mind. The shadow could have been anything, a coat hanging from a hook, a trick of the lighting. But she couldn't shake the memory of those 3 deliberate knocks, or the absolute silence that had followed the chicken sounds. Most unsettling of all was the feeling that something had been watching her throughout the night, something that the manual's authors knew about and had learned to appease. She slept badly that day, waking frequently to the sound of knocking that turned out to be her neighbor hanging laundry or delivery vans in the street below. Chapter 4, The Voice. The second night brought rain, drumming against the manor's windows with a rhythm that almost masked the other sounds. Sarah had come prepared with a thermos of strong tea and a determination to treat the job as exactly what Grimsby claimed it was, monitoring empty buildings and following eccentric procedures written by overstressed predecessors. The theory held until 11:30, when the voice began. It started as a whisper from somewhere in the walls, speaking words in a language she didn't recognize. The cadence was harsh, guttural, with sharp consonants that seemed to bite at the air. As she listened, certain phrases repeated, growing more insistent with each repetition. Sarah opened the manual to Procedure 5, and when voices speak in foreign languages, especially Afrikaans, remain silent and do not look toward the source. Afrikaans. She had never heard the language spoken, but something about the voice's rhythm and harshness fit what she imagined it might sound like. The whispers seemed to be coming from the east corridor, the one that led to the forbidden wing. The voice grew louder, more aggressive. She caught fragments that almost sounded like English mixed in with the foreign words. Took it, mine, taking it back. Then, clear as if someone stood beside her desk, she heard, Jule was mine. Ik het dit van jou gehad. Ik neem dit terug. The word sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the October cold. There was something in the voice's tone, a claiming quality that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Without thinking, she turned toward the corridor. The voice stopped immediately. Sarah sat frozen, realizing she had broken Procedure 5. The silence stretched on, but it felt different from the previous night's quiet. This was an expectant silence, as if something was waiting to see what she would do next. Minutes passed. Eventually, she forced herself to make the logbook entry. 2330. Voice in East Corridor. Foreign language. Followed Procedure 5 foreign. It wasn't entirely true. She had looked toward the source, but she couldn't bring herself to write about her mistake. The rest of the night passed without major incident, though she thought she heard soft footsteps in the upper floors during her 2 o'clock patrol. The pattern continued over the following nights. The knocking at the front door came every evening around 10:30. Always 3 sharp raps, always met with silence when she asked the required question. The chicken sounds occurred sometime after midnight, usually when she was beginning to feel drowsy. The shadow in the corridor appeared during each patrol, acknowledged with a bow of her head, and the voice grew bolder. By the end of her first week, it was speaking for minutes at a time, the harsh foreign words interspersed with fragments of English that seemed designed to unnerve her. Your life, it would whisper, then continue in what she now felt certain was Afrikaans. Mine, more foreign words than taking it back. Sarah began to dread the moments when the voice spoke. There was something possessive in its tone, something that suggested it was not merely talking to itself but addressing her directly. She followed Procedure 5 religiously, never looking toward the source, but she could feel it growing stronger with each passing night. On Friday evening, Grimsby arrived with her first week's pay in cash and a thermos of soup. You're settling in well, he observed, studying the logbook entries. Very consistent adherence to the procedures. Mr. Grimsby, about that voice. Yes, it's speaking English sometimes, parts of sentences mixed in with the foreign language. His expression grew serious. What sort of sentences? Sarah hesitated. Something about his intensity made her reluctant to repeat what she had heard. Just fragments, nothing coherent. I see. He made a note in a small book he carried. Continue following Procedure 5. It's very important that you don't engage with it in any way. What would happen if someone did engage with it? Grimsby's pale eyes met hers. Your predecessor asked similar questions in her final week. I wouldn't recommend pursuing that line of inquiry. He left her with more warnings about the East Wing and a reminder that the building's heating system was unreliable. If you get cold, there are extra blankets in the storage room. But under no circumstances should you attempt to access the East Wing for any reason. That night, the voice spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Chapter 5. The Claiming. By her 3rd week, Sarah had developed a routine that helped her cope with the manor's peculiarities. She brought books to read during the quiet hours, made frequent cups of tea, and treated each strange occurrence as simply another item to log. The work was unsettling, but it was steady pay in a town where such things were increasingly rare. The voice had become almost familiar, its nightly monologues in Afrikaans punctuated by those disturbing English fragments. She had learned not to listen too closely to the words, letting them wash over her like background noise while she focused on the monitors or her paperwork. It was during one of these sessions, sometime after midnight on a Tuesday, that she heard something new. Sarah. The voice whispered in perfectly clear English. She froze, her pen halfway through logging a routine entry. The voice had never used her name before, had never addressed her so directly. Sarah, it repeated, drawing out the syllables, Joican my whore. She didn't know what the foreign words meant, but the English was unmistakable. It knew her name. It knew she could hear it. I took it from you once before, the voice continued, mixing languages with growing confidence. Julua, your life, was mine to take. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped her pen. Procedure 5 said to remain silent, but the voice was speaking directly to her now, claiming things that made no sense. Ek neem dit terug, it whispered, taking it back. The phrase from Procedure 7 echoed in her mind. Certain phrases must never be uttered aloud. If you hear them spoken, do not repeat them, even to yourself. But she had already heard it, had already understood what the voice was claiming. It was talking about her life, about taking it back. The implication was terrifying. Over the following nights, the voice became increasingly personal. It spoke about her childhood, about fears she had never shared with anyone. It knew about her father's redundancy, about the months of unemployment, about the desperation that had brought her to this job. You came here because you had nowhere else to go, it observed during Thursday night's session. Sus Deander, like the others. Others. Sarah thought about her predecessor's abrupt departure, about the one before her who had lasted nearly 2 months. How many others had sat in this chair, listening to this voice grow stronger and more invasive each night? They all learned eventually, the voice continued. Julie was always mine. I only let you borrow it. The words sent a chill through her that went deeper than fear. There was something in the voice's certainty, its casual ownership of her existence, that made her feel unmoored from reality. On Friday, Grimsby arrived to find her haggard and exhausted. The voice, she said without preamble, it's talking about my life, claiming ownership of it. His expression grew grim. What exactly has it said? That my life was his, its, to begin with, that it's taking it back. Sarah met his eyes. What does that mean? Grimsby was quiet for a long moment, studying the logbook entries. Miss Hartwell, I think it's time you understood something about this position, about why the procedures exist. He settled into the chair across from her desk. This manor has a history that goes back further than the security operation, much further. The conversion to a monitoring station was not simply a matter of convenience. What do you mean? There have been incidents here, disappearances, always involving the night staff, always after they began to engage with the phenomena, rather than simply following the procedures. Sarah felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. What kind of disappearances? The sort where people simply aren't here when the morning shift arrives. No signs of struggle, no indication they ever left the building. They're simply gone. Gone where? That, Grimsby said quietly, is the question no one has been able to answer. He leaned forward, his pale eyes intense. The procedures exist because previous operators learned, through trial and error, how to coexist with whatever presence inhabits this place. Follow them exactly, and you'll be safe. Deviate from them. Like my predecessor did. Like they all did, eventually. The voice has a way of making the procedures seem unnecessary, even foolish. It builds familiarity, comfort. It makes you feel like you understand what you're dealing with. Sarah thought about the past few nights, how she had begun to anticipate the voice's appearances, how she had started to listen more carefully to its words despite Procedure 5. It knows my name, she said quietly. Grimsby's expression darkened. That's concerning. It usually takes longer to reach that level of specificity. How much longer? Your predecessor lasted 3 weeks. You're approaching that now. The weight in Sarah's stomach grew heavier. What am I supposed to do? Follow the procedures. All of them. Exactly. He stood and gathered his coat. And Miss Hartwell, if the voice begins speaking that particular phrase, the one mentioned in Procedure 7, do not acknowledge it in any way. Don't think about the words. Don't consider their meaning. Pretend you haven't heard them at all. What phrase? But Grimsby was already walking toward the door. You'll know it when you hear it. And when you do, that will be the time to decide whether this job is worth continuing. Chapter 6. The Decision. The phrase came on Sunday night, spoken with a clarity that cut through the autumn wind rattling the windows. Your life was mine. I took it from you. I am taking it back. The voice spoke it in English first, then repeated it in Afrikaans, then English again. Each repetition seemed to carry more weight, more certainty. Sarah sat frozen at her desk, the words echoing in her mind despite her efforts to ignore them. Jouw leeuwen was mine. Ik heb dit van jou gevat. Ik neem dit terug. The manual's procedure 7 seemed inadequate now. How could she pretend not to hear something spoken so directly, so personally? The voice wasn't whispering from the walls anymore. It seemed to be speaking from directly behind her chair. You know it's true, the voice continued conversationally. You've always known, haven't you? That feeling that your life isn't quite your own, that you're living someone else's experiences. Sarah found herself nodding before she caught herself. There had been moments, particularly during the long months of unemployment, when she had felt exactly that way. As if she was watching her life happen to someone else, as if she was borrowing an existence that belonged elsewhere. The depression, the voice observed, the sense that nothing you do matters, that you're just going through the motions. That's because you are, Sarah. You're living a life I allowed you to have. The words hit too close to home. Sarah had struggled with those exact feelings for years, the sense that she was somehow disconnected from her own existence. But everyone felt that way sometimes, didn't they? Not everyone, the voice said, as if reading her thoughts. Only those who are living borrowed time. It was speaking continuously now, a steady stream of words that seemed designed to break down her resistance to engaging with it. The voice talked about her childhood fears, her teenage insecurities, her adult failures. It knew details that no one should know, intimate moments she had shared with no one. The night you decided to take all those pills, it whispered. You were 16, alone in your bedroom, convinced no one would miss you. Sarah's breath caught. She had never told anyone about that night, about sitting on her bedroom floor with a bottle of her mother's medication, counting out tablets until the bottle was empty. She had sat there for hours, holding them in her palm, before finally pouring them back into the bottle and putting it away. I stopped you, the voice said with satisfaction. I wasn't ready to collect what was mine. But I've been watching ever since, waiting for the right moment. That's not true, Sarah whispered, breaking procedure 5 for the first time in weeks. The moment the words left her mouth, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The monitors flickered, their screens showing not the empty industrial sites but a single figure standing in what looked like the East Wing corridor. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in what might have been a suit from decades past. Its face was obscured by shadow, but its posture suggested it was looking directly at the camera, directly at her. Now you see me, the voice said, and Sarah realized it was coming from the monitors, from the figure on the screens. Now we can talk properly. Sarah reached for the power switches, but the monitors remained active despite her efforts. The figure began to walk, moving from camera to camera, always facing toward her position in the operations room. You cannot run from what was always mine, it said, its voice echoing from the speakers now. I gave you 26 years of borrowed existence. I let you make choices, form attachments, build a life that was never truly yours. My life is my own, Sarah said, standing from her chair. Is it? The figure paused in what she recognized as the main corridor. Then why are you here, Sarah? In this place, following rules you don't understand, working a job that pays you to acknowledge my presence? The question hit her like a physical blow. Why was she here? The job had seemed like a godsend when she needed it most, but the circumstances of finding it now seemed impossibly convenient. The advertisement in the paper, the lack of questions during the hiring process, the immediate start date, none of it had seemed strange at the time. I brought you here, the voice confirmed, guided your steps, influenced your decisions, made sure you would be in the right place at the right time to see that advertisement, to feel desperate enough to take a job that others had fled from. Sarah moved toward the operations room door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door remained firmly closed. There's nowhere to go, the figure said from the monitors. This was always going to be where it ended, where I collected what was mine. What do you want from me? Nothing you haven't already been giving me. Your choices, your experiences, your emotions, I've been feeding on them for 26 years. But borrowed time always comes due, Sarah, and I'm ready to foreclose. The monitors showed the figure moving again, climbing stairs she recognized as leading to the upper floor. It was coming to find her. Sarah ran to the telephone and dialed the emergency extension written inside the manual's cover. The line was dead. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The figure appeared in the operations room doorway without her hearing it approach. Up close, it was even more wrong than it had seemed on the monitors. Its proportions were human but stretched, as if someone had taken a normal person and pulled them upward like taffy. The suit it wore was decades out of date, pinstriped and formal in a way that belonged to the 1940s or 1950s. Its face was the worst part, not because it was hideous, but because it was almost familiar, like looking at a photograph of someone you might have known once, if the photograph had been left in the sun too long and the features had begun to blur and shift. "Hello, Sarah," it said, and its voice was exactly as she'd been hearing it for weeks. "It's time we concluded our business." Sarah pressed herself against the wall behind her desk, as far from the creature as the small room would allow. "What are you?" "I am what owns you, what has always owned you." It stepped into the room and she noticed it cast no shadow despite the bright monitor lights. "I am the one who made the choice when you were 16. I am the one who guided you through university, through your jobs, through every decision that brought you to this moment. People make their own choices, do they? The thing that might once have been human tilted its head at an unnatural angle. "Then explain the gaps, Sarah. The moments when you felt like you were watching your life happen to someone else. The decisions that seemed to make themselves. The opportunities that appeared exactly when you needed them." As it spoke, memories began to surface. Moments she had forgotten or dismissed. The university application she had no memory of submitting, but which had led to her acceptance. The job interviews where she had given answers she didn't remember preparing. The relationships that had ended for reasons she couldn't quite recall. "Every significant moment in your life," the creature continued, "I was there, making choices for you. Because your life was never yours to live freely. It was a loan, and loans must be repaid. I don't understand what you're talking about. Don't you?" It moved closer, and she could see its face more clearly now. The features were shifting constantly, never quite settling into a fixed configuration. "The depression you've struggled with, the sense of disconnection, that's what happens when someone else is living your life for you. You're a passenger in your own existence, Sarah. You always have been." The words resonated with a truth she didn't want to acknowledge. There had been so many moments when she had felt exactly like that. A passenger, an observer, someone watching her own life unfold without truly participating in it. "But why?" she asked. "Why me?" "Because you gave it to me," the creature said simply. "That night when you were 16, sitting with those pills in your hand, you made a wish, Sarah. Do you remember?" She did remember, suddenly and completely. Sitting on her bedroom floor, overwhelmed by the weight of teenage despair, she had whispered a desperate plea into the darkness. "I wish someone else could live this life for me. I wish I didn't have to make these choices anymore." "And I granted that wish," the creature said with something that might have been satisfaction. "I took control, made your choices, lived your life for you. All you had to do was exist, to provide the vessel for experiences I could collect and savor." "You're lying." "Am I? Then why does it feel so familiar, Sarah? Why does every word I'm saying resonate with something you've always known but never wanted to acknowledge?" The creature was right, and that was the most terrifying part. Everything it described matched feelings she had carried for years. The disconnection, the sense that her life was happening to someone else, the way major decisions seemed to make themselves. "But now," the creature continued, "I'm ready for something more than borrowed experiences. I want the life itself, completely, finally." "What does that mean?" "It means you disappear, Sarah, not die. Disappearing would be a mercy. You become part of me, your consciousness absorbed into mine. All your memories, all your experiences, all your potential futures, they become mine to explore and exploit." Sarah thought about her predecessors, about the operators who had simply vanished without trace. The others are still with me, the creature confirmed. Part of me. They add their perspectives to mine, their memories to my collection. You'll join them, and together we'll continue to feast on the experiences of others. The creature began to move toward her again, and Sarah realized she was trapped. The door was sealed, the telephone dead, and even if she could somehow escape the operations room, where would she go? The manor was isolated, surrounded by miles of empty moor, and the creature had already demonstrated it could appear anywhere in the building. Don't fight it, the creature advised. Your predecessors learned that resistance only makes the process more unpleasant. Accept what was always inevitable. But Sarah found herself thinking about the manual, about the procedures that had allowed other operators to survive. Follow them exactly, Grimsby had said, and you'll be safe. The creature was here because she had broken Procedure 5, had engaged with it instead of remaining silent. The procedures, she said suddenly, they work, don't they? They keep you contained somehow. The creature's expression shifted, became wary. The procedures are meaningless superstition. Then why do they work? Why did the operators who followed them survive while the ones who broke them disappeared? Coincidence? Luck? But Sarah could hear the uncertainty in its voice now. The procedures did matter. They were some kind of protection, a way of acknowledging the creature's presence without fully engaging with it. Who claims this space? She said suddenly, remembering Procedure 2. The creature stopped moving toward her. What? Who claims this space? She repeated, louder this time. The creature's form wavered, became less solid. You cannot... I bow my head to acknowledge your presence, Sarah continued, following Procedure 6, but I do not engage with voices in foreign languages. Stop, the creature commanded, but its voice was fading. Sarah reached for the manual on her desk, flipping through the procedures. I remain silent when I hear animal sounds. I do not enter the East Wing. I do not respond to knocks without asking the proper question. The creature was becoming translucent, its carefully maintained form beginning to dissolve. These procedures bind you, Sarah realized. They're not just rules for the operators, they're restrictions on you, limits on what you can do as long as they're followed. Clever girl, the creature said, and for a moment its voice carried a note of genuine admiration. But you've already broken the procedures, Sarah. You've engaged with me, acknowledged my presence beyond the prescribed methods. The binding is weakened. It was true. By speaking to it, by engaging in conversation, she had violated multiple procedures. The creature was stronger now than it should have been, more present. But not strong enough, she said, understanding flooding through her. Not yet. That's why you needed me to break the procedures completely, to give you permission to take what you claim is yours. The creature's form solidified slightly. Permission was given 26 years ago, by a frightened child who didn't understand what she was offering. But I understand now. Sarah stood straighter, feeling a strength she hadn't possessed in years. And I revoke that permission. You cannot. I revoke it, she said firmly. My life is my own. My choices are my own. Whatever claim you think you have on my existence, I reject it. The creature let out a sound that was part laugh, part scream. You think it's that simple? You think you can just revoke 26 years of contract with a few words? But even as it spoke, its form continued to waver. The monitors around the room began to flicker, showing glimpses of other figures, pale, frightened faces that Sarah recognized as the previous operators. They were watching from within the screens, their mouths moving as if trying to speak. Your predecessors thought the same thing, the creature continued, but its voice was losing substance. They all tried to reject me in the end, but the debt was already owed, the contract already sealed in their moment of desperation. Sarah looked at the faces on the monitors, seeing her own potential future reflected in their trapped expressions, but she also saw something else, a flicker of hope in their eyes, as if her defiance was giving them strength. Maybe they couldn't break free, she said, moving toward the manual on her desk. But they left these procedures for a reason. They found a way to fight back. She began reading from the manual, speaking each procedure aloud like an incantation, Never respond to a knock without first asking, "Who claims this space?" Do not enter the east wing after dark. If you hear animal sounds, remain silent and motionless. With each procedure she recited, the creature became less solid, more agitated. The faces on the monitors grew clearer, more present. When voices speak in foreign languages, remain silent and do not look toward the source, Sarah continued. Never confront the shadow in the hallway. Acknowledge it only by bowing your head. "Stop," the creature demanded. But its voice was barely a whisper now. "Certain phrases must never be uttered aloud," Sarah read, then looked directly at the dissolving form before her. "But I'm not uttering them. I'm rejecting them. Your life was mine. No, it wasn't. I took it from you. No, you didn't. I am taking it back. No, you're not." The creature let out a final, anguished cry that seemed to come from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, the monitors themselves. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, it shattered into fragments of shadow and light. The monitors went dark for a moment, then flickered back to life, showing their normal feeds, empty industrial sites and abandoned buildings. But in one brief frame, Sarah saw the faces of her predecessors one last time, and they were smiling. Epilogue: The Dawn. Grimsby arrived at 6 o'clock to find Sarah sitting calmly at her desk, completing the final entry in the logbook. She looked tired but oddly peaceful, as if some long-carried weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Miss Hardwell," he said, studying her face with concern, "are you quite all right? You look different," she finished for him. "I feel different, like I'm living in my own life for the first time in years." He glanced at the logbook, noting the final entry, on 3:45, contract terminated. Procedures no longer necessary. What happened here last night? Sarah stood and gathered her things. "I remembered something I'd forgotten, Mr. Grimsby. I remembered that desperation isn't the same as consent, and that choices made by frightened children don't have to bind us forever." She handed him the manual, its pages somehow lighter than they had been, less worn. "I don't think you'll need to find another replacement. Whatever was here, whatever made those procedures necessary, it's gone now." Grimsby opened the manual and found that most of the text had faded, leaving only the basic security protocols that any night watchman might follow. The strange specific warnings about shadows and voices in foreign languages had vanished entirely. "How?" he asked. Sarah paused at the door, looking back at the operations room where she had spent 3 weeks learning to reclaim herself. Sometimes the only way to break a contract is to remember that you never really agreed to it in the first place. She walked out into the morning light, feeling the fog lift from the valley and from her mind simultaneously. Behind her, Blackmore House stood empty and ordinary, its windows reflecting nothing more threatening than the dawn. For the first time in 26 years, Sarah Hartwell was living entirely in her own life, making her own choices, claiming her own space in the world. And as she walked down the hill toward town, she found herself looking forward to whatever came next, not because someone else had planned it for her, but because it would be genuinely, completely her own. The manor was converted back to council offices within the month. The night security position was eliminated entirely. After all, there was nothing left to guard against. Sometimes, late at night, visitors to the building reported hearing faint sounds from the upper floors, not the threatening noises of something supernatural, but softer sounds. Laughter, conversation, the gentle settling of old grievances finally put to rest. And in the town below, Sarah Hartwell began the difficult and rewarding work of learning who she really was when no one else was making her choices for her. It was a process that would take years, but for the first time since she was 16, she had all the time in the world. It was, after all, finally and completely her own,